Hi guys, it's really good to see you again. I hope you're comfortable. We are going to be discussing the business analysis, planning and monitoring knowledge area again, but this time we'll focus on the inputs and outputs of each of the tasks. So be ready, we're about to start. Great, so this will be a recap of the tasks within this knowledge area, and we will then take a deeper dive into the inputs and the outputs for each of those tasks. So let's have a look at the bigger picture. Just to remind you, the Babel guide structure, here we are looking at the knowledge area, which is part of the core content of the Babel guide. Okay, so just a recommendation, you would most likely already have seen the week 1 business analysis, planning and monitoring part 1 to 3 lessons, where I talk about the different elements that make up each of the tasks within this knowledge area. However, if you haven't seen those particular videos, I recommend that you first watch those videos before you come and look at the inputs and output video that this one will cover, because it's good to understand what the tasks are all about, understand their scope and their purpose and what you should consider when you're performing those tasks before you start to really get a grasp on what makes sense to be inputs and outputs. Okay, so let's continue. Just before we continue, if you are brand new to the study group, this is actually a free BABOK 3 study group presented by myself, Esther Lessing. I am the founder and director of Business Analysis Excellence, and you can simply join our group from baexcellence.com. There's a link there that you can simply register with your email address. And once you've done that, you'll receive emails every week that guides you through a series of more than 30 training videos. You've got study notes, you've got quizzes, everything structured in a 6 weeks program to help you get ready for your ECBA, your CCBA or your CBAP exam. So take advantage of this free training. You'll also receive some special discounts and coupons that you can use for formal IIBA endorsed training with us and earn some professional development credits. And then, of course, I am a CBAP certified business analyst myself, and I've worked for many years within business analysis. So hopefully this will bring some depth to these discussions. And then, of course, just finally, BABOK 3 Facebook group. We've got a great group of people, more than 1,000, I think 300 people in the group participating and joining in great discussions and sharing achievements of getting certified. So make sure you join that exclusive group as well. Okay, but now let's get stuck into this topic. So business analysis, planning and monitoring, just as a short recap, consists of 5 different tasks. So we've got plan business analysis approach, plan stakeholder engagement, plan business analysis governance, plan business analysis information management, and then identify business analysis performance improvements. Now let's take each of these tasks in turn and then have a look at the purpose and the inputs and outputs. So let's start by just remembering what is the purpose of this task of plan business analysis approach. So this is to define an appropriate method to conduct business analysis activities. So now we'll take a look at this and we'll say, okay, so if we understand the purpose of this task, what would make sense to be inputs into this task? And in this case, the inputs are really just needs. Now, from a BABOK perspective, the reasoning for this is that the business analysis approach is shaped by the problem or opportunity faced by the organization, is shaped, by the problem or the opportunity faced by the organization. And it's necessary to consider what is known about the need at the time of planning, while acknowledging that understanding evolves through business analysis activity. So this is really just saying that it's good to have a general idea of what is the problem that the project will be fixing. Just in general, what is the need? Why are we here? that helps us, and that's why it feeds into this task. Now, in terms of the outputs, the business analysis approach itself is an output, which makes logical sense, and it's quite easy for you to remember. From a business and BABOK perspective, we're looking at it identifies the business analysis approach and activities that will be performed across an initiative, including who will perform the activities, the timing and the sequencing of the work, the deliverables that will be produced, and the business analysis techniques that may be utilized. So they also say that the remaining outputs of the business analysis, planning and monitoring knowledge area may be integrated into an overall approach or be independent based on methodology, organization, and perspective. So this is where they're talking about the wider organization and their general approach or methodology for planning work that needs to be done. So this business analysis approach can potentially be integrated into that. So this is really quite simple to start with. So you need some general information about the problem or the need that's going to be addressed by this project. You perform the task of defining what the approach will be for business analysis, and that then results in the actual approach. All right, so now let's have a look at the next task. This is planned stakeholder engagement. Now, the purpose of this task, if you remember, is to plan an approach for establishing and maintaining effective working relationships with the stakeholders. Now, from an input and output perspective, here we are looking at, for inputs, we're also looking at the needs. So it's good to understand the business need and the parts of the enterprise that it will affect, because that will help us to find and identify stakeholders. And then the second aspect that is actually going to flow as an input into our task of planning the stakeholder engagement will be the approach that we've decided on. So the business analysis approach is incorporating the overall business analysis approach into the stakeholder analysis, the collaboration and the communication approaches. And this is necessary to ensure consistency in our approaches. So if you imagine, and this is coming from an exam preparation perspective, you can see how, if you know generally what the approach will be for all the business analysis activities, like you know that there will be workshops across a series of departments, that is how we might be doing the elicitation. That will help guide you. Okay, so if we're going to be running a series of workshops, we need to think about how do we communicate and engage with all the relevant stakeholders within that we would like in the departments that we would like to have in the workshops. What will be their role? What kind of collaboration would we like them to participate in? How are we going to do that, generally speaking? So makes sense again. If you think of it like that, and from a practical perspective, you can remember, okay, that makes sense as input into this task. And then, of course, outputs. Here again, you would have worked through all of these things that you want to consider for stakeholder engagement and defined an approach for that. So this will contain a list of the stakeholders, their characteristics, which were analyzed, and a listing of roles and responsibilities for the change. It also identifies the collaboration, communication approaches the business analyst will utilize during the initiative. So I'm sure that again, it makes quite a lot of logical sense if you think about it. Now, what I would like you to think about when you do your exam prep, try and understand the inputs and the outputs from this type of perspective. Let it make sense to you. Don't just parrot the information and try and list all the inputs and outputs, because that's not necessarily going to teach you very much. It's much better if you can have a deeper understanding and bring it back to some practical context that makes sense to you. All right, so let's have a look at the third task, plan business analysis governance. So here we're looking at how to define how decisions are made about requirements and design. And this includes reviews, change control, approvals, and prioritization. So here again, it's quite, as you would remember, quite an overview type of definition of how do we govern all of this business analysis work we'll be doing. All right. So now if we look at these in terms of the inputs and outputs, inputs, we've got the business analysis approach going into this. And you can imagine that we need to know what the approach will be in order to work out how do we manage all of the deliverables, the artifacts, the ways that we prioritize, all of these aspects. And that's why it makes sense that you will need that information to come in order to define your governance for business analysis. And a similar reason would apply to stakeholder engagement. So here you've got the stakeholder engagement approach, where you are identifying the stakeholders and their understanding their communication and collaboration needs. It's useful in determining their participation in the governance approach. So the engagement approach may be updated based on the completion of the governance approach. Especially if you start talking about prioritization or change control, you're defining all of that. That might make a few changes to how you plan to engage. But ultimately, this is an input into this activity. And then, of course, the output makes perfect sense. You've got the governance output, governance approach as output, Here you've got, it identifies the stakeholders who will have responsibility and authority to make decisions about business analysis work, including who will be responsible for setting priorities, who will approve changes to the business analysis information. So all of this then comes together beautifully during the governance task. Okay, so now let's have a look at the fourth task in this knowledge area, which is planned business analysis information management. Okay, so here we're developing an approach for how business analysis information will be stored and accessed. So if you step back a little, so we know what the general approach is, we know what the stakeholder engagement approach is, and we've got the governance defined. Now we are ready to go and say, okay, how are we going to manage all the information that we need to store as part of this initiative, and how do we access this information? Now, if we keep that in mind and we think about the inputs and the outputs, what would we need to have information about in order to define our information strategy? So here it makes sense to say we need to know what the approach will be. If it's going to be an approach where we do traditional waterfall, that will have an impact on how we manage the information. Whereas if we decide we're going to work on an iterative style project where the methodology is a certain methodology, maybe agile based, that has affected our business analysis approach, which we defined a little while ago. And because of that, that's definitely going to be, that information is going to be needed for us to know how to manage our information in terms of information management. And in a similar way, depending on our stakeholder engagement approach, here we know what the communication and collaboration needs are for the stakeholders. And that could help us in how do we then make our business analysis information available in terms of accessibility and storage. And finally, the governance approach. Here we're saying it defines how business analysts manage changes to requirements and designs, how decisions and approvals for the business analysis deliverables will be made, and how priorities will be set. And this also has an impact on how we store and structure our business analysis information. Now, ultimately, once you've defined this, so you've performed this task, you've used all three of those inputs, you will end up with one output, which is the information management approach. And this includes then a defined approach for how business analysis information will be stored, accessed, and utilized during the change and after the change is complete. Okay, now let's have a look at the last one. So here we're looking at identify business analysis performance improvements. Now, the purpose of this is to assess business analysis work and to plan to improve processes where required. Now, If we then step into the inputs and the output side of this, we have as inputs defined the business analysis approach. Now this identifies, just to repeat this, the business analysis deliverables that will be produced, the activities that will need to be performed, including when they'll be performed and who will be performing them, and the techniques that will be used. And it also includes an input called performance objectives external. So what does this mean? This is basically describing the desired performance outcomes that an enterprise or an organization is hoping to achieve. So it's those wider organizational performance objectives that is in fact overarching all of the business analysis activities that you're doing on your initiative. So we would like to assess, have we in fact, with the work that we've done, in the approach that we followed, have we contributed to those overall performance objectives? And in order for us to do that, we need to have that information flow into this task. So that's why this is an input into this business analysis task. Now, output-wise, you end up with having a business analysis performance assessment. So what is that as an output? So basically, this is including all of the information in relation to assessing the performance analysis or the performance improvement. So you've identified here that it includes a comparison of planned versus actual performance. So it could show you as to what we were hoping to achieve and what we actually achieved. It shows you the root cause of variances from the expected performance. So you can say, okay, so we didn't quite achieve the level of deliverables or timeframes or content or scope that we were hoping to be able to achieve. And these are the root causes for that. So we've done a bit of a root cause analysis as part of this assessment. It also gives some ideas for how do we actually address some of these issues that we've identified. And finally, it will give other findings to help understand the performance of business analysis processes more generally. So you'll have a look at the processes that was followed and why it worked or didn't work very well. Okay, so that was the fifth task. So you've now had an overview of these inputs and outputs that goes into the tasks within this knowledge area. Let's do a quick quiz. You know how much I love those. So with your new knowledge, let's see how well you go. So first question, business analysis approach is an output of planned business analysis governance. Is that true or false? I'll give you 2 seconds. 1, 2. All right, so that's false. That's not actually an output. I'm sure you knew that. Question 2, governance approach is an input to planned business analysis information management. Is that true or false? 1, 2. Let's see. True. So governance approach is an input to planned business analysis information management, just like we've just discussed. Okay, so the third question. The output of this task identifies the stakeholders who have responsibility and authority to make decisions about business analysis work, including who will be responsible for setting priorities and who will approve the changes to business analysis information. Which is the task I'm referring to? Okay, so planned business analysis governance, of course. Okay, so over to you as always. I have no idea in which wonderful country in this world you are in. Go to the Facebook group and share where you're from, and let's have a discussion about the inputs and outputs. Does it make sense to you? Do you have any deeper questions that you might be interested in other people in the group's opinion about? So please share your questions. And if there's anything that you think we should know about this particular topic in relation to the exam, please share that with us as well. We're working together to achieve our certifications. Okay, so just thank you very much. Yes, I'm Esther Lessing, and I am from Business Analysis Excellence. It would be great if you stop by and have a look at our website and just participate in any way that you'd like. Great, thank you very much.